Today we have a crazy revenge story involving twins. We'll get into that in a bit, but first, how I caused my coworker to get the most ghastly breakout of her life. A while ago, I was offered a job at an advertising firm in my state. I was glad because not only had I always wanted to work in advertising, the firm was new and close to home. I'd always dreamed of having a big job and living close to home, but at some point, it started to look like my dream was just going to be that, a dream. I was talking to my mom about relocating when the firm called me. One of my friends from college worked at the firm's head office and suggested me to their boss as one of the vital staff at the new branch of the firm to be created in my state. They asked if I wanted to come over for an interview, and I agreed. After ending the call, I fell to my knees. That was a sign, I thought, that I needn't move to a new state to find a different job that I'd like. On the agreed interview date, I looked my best, as always, and went in for the interview. The first person I met at the new branch was another lady who was just about my age. She looked good, and I even complimented her curly hair. She didn't seem happy to see me, though. She nodded quickly at my compliment and walked away. I barely even thought about her behavior until after the interview. I was just feeling grateful to be considered. Later on, I was invited into their conference room, where the same lady sat with 3 other men. One of the men introduced everyone to me. He said they all were sent down to start the new branch from the head company, and that the woman who was supposed to fill the role they were interviewing me for abandoned ship at the last minute. We were all going to be working together, so the boss insisted that everyone was there to meet their potential work colleague. Since they were all there, they were involved in the interview process and all were able to see my resume. I had an impressive resume for someone my age. I had lots of experience in advertising from interning at different firms while in uni and during the summer. I'd also briefly worked in different places after college before I decided to move back home to be close to my parents. I noticed that the only lady there, the one I'd earlier met, wasn't so happy to see me. She kept stealing glances at me and her expression was not that of admiration. It was like she needed me to shut up and get out. I also noticed that after I answered the questions thrown at me, she would say something in French to their boss. I could tell from his accent that our boss was a Frenchman and this lady spoke French too. After they asked all their questions, she asked if I could handle the workload in the office, and went on to tell me about how they usually got busy at different times of the year. I said I could, wished them all a nice day, and left. On the Friday of that week, I was contacted to ask when I could resume work. I resumed my position 2 weeks later. It was a small office. The firm was a known one, so compared to their head office, the branch in my state was quite small. I had to share an office with the lady who had interviewed me, and as usual, she didn't seem pleased at all with the development. "I figured you'd like to have an office to yourselves as the only girls we have around here," my boss had said in his thick French accent. His reason for wanting us to share an office made sense, except that the pairing became my undoing in that office. First of all, she was not happy to share her office, and she made it pretty clear in words and actions. Before I came, she had the office to herself, one that was separate from the boys, and she liked it that way. When she first mentioned to me that she hated that she now had to share, I smiled wryly and even apologized. I honestly just didn't want to offend her. The office was divided into 2 parts, and it took her months to get her stuff off of my side of the office. I reminded her every day about it until I got tired and started to live with it. One day, I got very tired of the seeming rivalry between us and tried to talk her out of it. I told her that I was a sweet person and asked that she give me a chance before writing me off. She completely gaslighted me, told me she didn't understand what I was talking about, and looked at me like I was making things up. Her hostility continued, but rather than be the usual sweet girl, I completely ignored her. I stopped saying hello to her every morning and stayed out of her way. We only spoke at the regular staff meetings and when we were meeting with clients, and it was always professional talk. I'd laugh and banter with the men, but with her, it had to be professional. When she noticed that I'd stopped trying to get her to be on my side, she started being friendly, but I ignored her still. I was very cold towards her, even more so than she was when I started working at the firm. I guess she was mad that I was no longer interested in being friendly and started to plot how to take me down. She started to find loopholes in my suggestions at meetings, and did that so frequently that our boss had us both stay behind after a meeting and warned us to never allow a repeat of what had just happened. She putting my ideas down before a client. The rule was that we could tear one another's ideas down as much as we wanted when it was an in-house meeting, but when clients are around, we must never do that. The problem, however, was that my boss was attacking us as though I was a part of the problem, when his anger should have been directed at her. She was the one who tore down my ideas and tried to make me look stupid before our clients. My boss gave her preferential treatment, and I assumed it was because she spoke French. Anyway, I started planning my revenge when my boss almost sacked me for a lie she told against me. He suspended me. It happened that this young actress was trying to save herself after a scandal that involved her family. She wanted to look good to the public and needed professionals to clean up her reputation. My firm was all about appearance and putting people and products in a good light, so her people contacted us. She was skeptical about coming over to the firm to avoid being seen, so they requested that the firm send staff over to her home. My boss decided that it made sense to send my lady colleague and me to her home. The next day, we dressed nicely and went to this client's home. I'm a religious person, like many people in the country and many of the actress's critics. So I told her that I was going to offer a perspective that represented that of her critics. It was important to know just how to attack public opinion and tilt it in her favor. We talked about that for an hour while my petty colleague acted bored and tired. She probably wanted to spite me and my opinions, and since my boss wasn't there to caution her, and our client was a young actress, she figured it didn't matter. After we were done with our meeting, our host had her chef prepare lunch, and all through lunch, my colleague went on and on about seeing her shoe collections. The actress had been in the news on different occasions about her large shoe collections, and my colleague was requesting to see them. It was, of course, very unprofessional, and even when the actress looked uncomfortable, my colleague went on and on. I think she was friendly to prove to me that she knew how to carry on an informal conversation, or to show me that the actress liked her. The next day, my boss was contacted, and her team said they were taking us off the situation and would find someone else. That day, I'd called in sick because I was tired and needed to rest. When they called, my lady colleague panicked that the reason the actress shut us out was because of how unprofessional her behavior at the house was. She then lied that I criticized the actress, told her I was religious, and justified the actions of her critics. My boss was mad. The next day, he called me to his office and he was going to fire me. After a full hour of defending myself, he suspended me instead. I was heated. It was my word against hers. And I would have asked that we involve the actress, but that would have been very unprofessional too. I decided to accept my suspension in good faith and spend the time out of work plotting my revenge against my colleague at work. From sharing an office with her, I knew she was very particular about her beauty, and that was probably why she felt so threatened by me when I first resumed work. I was another pretty lady in the office who looked just as good and carried herself well. I also noticed that after I resumed, she did certain beauty rituals at work at different times too. For instance, she had sunscreen that she reapplied often at work, different tubes of lip gloss, and all other stuff. She would also tell anyone who cared to listen about how her skin was sensitive and whatever. I remember her telling her mom about how badly her skin reacted to any product with alcohol. She added that she never even used perfumes with alcohol because her skin could never handle it. I went to the supermarket, bought a small bottle of methylated spirit, and hid it in my work drawer. Every day when she went out for lunch, I would shut the office door and pour the methylated spirit inside her sunscreen bottle. I would also do the same to her lipstick tube and moisturizer. After about a week, she had a very severe breakout. She looked so bad, it was as though she had been in an accident that only involved her face and neck. It was also an important time of the year for our business, so we were all very busy at work. It was one of those times when one would look stupid for wanting to take time off work. For nearly a month, she went about looking ugly. All through that period, her self-esteem took a nosedive. At that point, I made even more effort to look better than I usually did to work. I also became way more productive, and it helped tremendously with my work and how my boss and the boys saw me. After her acne and the spots cleared, she knew never to mess with me at work again. I'm not sure if she knew I did it, but if something like that happens after you tried to get someone fired, then you should know they did something. So in a situation like this where OP very clearly does have an enemy here, should they have expected that this breakout was somehow the cause of OP? Or do you think that most people in that kind of a situation, work enemies or not, would be pretty clueless to a coworker slipping stuff in their sunscreen and stuff like that? I'd like to know what you guys think. Also, hi, I'm Steven, and if you guys enjoy crazy stories of revenge, it would be amazing if you left a like or left a review if you're listening to my podcast. That said, our next story is, bully calls me a tramp in school, so I spread a worse rumor about him. When I, 19-year-old female, was a teenager, I switched schools countless times during my entire middle school and high school years. This was mostly because my dad's job required him to travel every few years. We didn't have our own personal house, and the apartments we rented were mostly paid off by the company he consulted for. This issue of changing schools affected me in lots of ways. I never had enough time to build meaningful relationships with the people in my school. Anytime I made a friend, we never had time to properly develop the necessary bond to consider ourselves best friends, and every time I left the school, that was usually the end of our relationship. It hurts me every time this happens. When I got to my fourth school, I started to pull away. I just stopped making friends or trying to relate with people because what's the use of forming relationships that'll end in a year and I'll have to start all over again? I started to keep to myself in the new schools, but that only caused more problems for me. I became the weird kid of the class and started to get picked on by bullies. I was the only child in my family and I didn't have anyone to defend me. I didn't even bother trying to tell my parents because I didn't want them to get all worried about me. This bullying continued for the greater part of my high school, till one day my dad got home from work and announced that we had to move again. For the first time, I was happy to leave my school and go somewhere else. I only hoped that the next school would be better, but it wasn't. My first week at the high school where I started my junior year was worse than my fourth school. The students were even worse than the previous ones. Everyone was mean to me. No one respected my privacy, and it felt like I was being bullied from all sides. The teachers were nonchalant, and whenever I reported a case of being bullied to the principal, he always swept it under the carpet. He downplayed the bullying and made me feel like I was overreacting and keen on causing trouble in his stellar school. Eventually, I just decided to give up on seeking help from people with higher authority. It was just for a year. 2 max. We either decide to move again, or I'm going to graduate from high school. Either way, it's all going to end, so I just had to be patient. A month into the new school, I finally made a friend. I was sitting in my normal booth at the far end of the cafeteria, as usual, and she walked over to sit with me. I was surprised because nothing like that had ever happened. Most people usually just avoid me. I didn't say anything though. I just ate my food in silence and she spoke first. She called my apartment street number and asked me if I stayed there. It was surprising for her to have that information and I said yes. She said she lived on the same street too, and she saw me walking to school past her house one morning. She introduced herself as Megan, 19-year-old female, and she said we had a few classes together. I never noticed because my face was always buried in my notebooks. Anyways, she didn't stand up to leave. She just kept talking and didn't mind that I wasn't putting in as much energy as she was. I only nodded and replied once in a while. She wasn't deterred at all. By the end of the day, she joined me as I walked home. She did that every day for the rest of the school term. I only started to open up to her during the school break. I told her about my parents and how we don't stay in a place for too long. Surprisingly, she said that it's better that I make the best of the time I had in school and that I should stop focusing on the negatives. Yes, I had a problem of not being able to form connections with people, but at least I got to meet many more people and experience what it was like living in different countries with people of different cultures than mine. Megan was the best friend I ever had. She taught me to enjoy the nomadic lifestyle, which I'd always thought of as a curse. This was when I gradually started to come out of my shell. I joined the cheerleading squad as I've always wanted to do, and I gradually started to get accepted into the school. I started to make friends outside Megan and her friend circle, including my ex-boyfriend Chris, 20-year-old male. Chris was one of the lacrosse jocks in the school and he was quite popular. I've known him since I started schooling there. He was one of the guys who was just in your face every time. Most of the lacrosse guys were bullies. Some of them called me mean names while they took lunch money from the boys. He was friends with most of these bullies, and even though I never saw him participate in the bullying, he was always moving with them. One day after cheer practice, I was talking to some of the girls in the squad when he approached me. I was surprised, but I kept my cool, and we talked. He complimented my practice, and then asked if I'd like to go to the movies with him during the weekend. That was the first time he was talking to me, and the track record I'd seen of him wasn't something I'd call good. Even if he didn't participate in the bullying himself, he was there sometimes and didn't do anything to stop it. I wasn't going to go out with someone like that, so I declined. It was evident on his face that he was shocked at my response. I won't blame him. Something as good looking as him probably doesn't get rejected. He asked why, and I told him all my reasons, sparing no tiny detail. He got defensive and said that he had never been involved in the bullying and that there was nothing he could do when the guys set their sights on a new prey. Yes, he actually said prey. He was very arrogant, and talking to him was pissing me off, so I left. The next day, though, he called me to a private class and apologized for his behavior. He explained that he had difficulty relating with people he liked, and that was why he was nervous around me. I said it was fine, but I still had no intention of going back to him. He didn't get mad like the previous day. Instead, he said it was fair, but he wasn't going to give up. He was going to do everything in his power to win me over. His confidence was impressive. Personally, I didn't think I'd fall for him, but I wanted to see him try. After that day, Chris became a perfect gentleman. He'd wait for me at the door of the hallway to hand me a pack of chocolate. Sometimes he'd go to my locker and drop a flower or a love letter. After a while, I forgot about the fact that he was a pompous jerk and saw him for what he was pretending to be. The perfect Prince Charming. I fell for him, and by the time he asked me to go out with him again, I agreed. We went to a movie theater, and after the movie, we went to get ice cream. I was really enjoying Chris's company, and I let my guard down. We left the ice cream shop late in the evening, and I wanted to call it a day. Chris refused and said that there was one more place he wanted to show me. We talked as we walked, and I didn't even pay attention to the turns we took. Eventually, we reached an abandoned park. Chris said that it was his favorite part of the city. He loved its quietness and how it's always cleared out by 8 p.m. After that, he moved close and took my hand. Like I said, I'd let my guard down and I didn't think of this as anything. But then he pulled me closer and kissed me. I was kind of surprised, but I went with it. We'd been talking for over a month and I was convinced that he liked me. But then his hands started sliding up and down my body and all my warning lights were going off. I leaned away and told him to stop, but he wouldn't. I was wearing a sundress and he tried to put his hands underneath. That was when I panicked and shoved him off me. He lost his patience and yelled at me, calling me insulting names. That was when it dawned on me that all he really wanted from me was sex. He never really liked me. He was just hoping that I was some easy target. I left the park and went straight home, swearing to never talk to Chris again. But that was not the end. The next day, when I got to school, I noticed that everyone was staring at me funny. Some were laughing while some were making comments and looking my way. I was curious as to what was happening, but I didn't have to wait long. Megan came to meet me and asked if it was true that I slept with Chris in the park. I had never been more shocked in my entire life. I literally felt my blood run cold as she explained to me that he was telling everyone about how he had hooked up with me in the park. I told her the true story, and while Megan believed me, she said no one else would, and she was right. By the end of the school day, I'd been called a tramp over 100 times. Some people even went ahead to draw explicit images of genitalia on pieces of paper and drop them in my locker. This went on for a few more days, and no matter what I said, I wasn't beating the allegations. I was branded a tramp. While Chris, on the other hand, was looked at like some kind of hero. It hurt so much because I actually trusted him. I could never have figured out that this was his plan all along. And after I stopped feeling sorry for myself, I decided to get my revenge against him. I had Megan in my corner, along with some girls in the cheerleading squad, and together, we thought of ways to get back at Chris for everything he had done to me. Eventually, Megan came up with the idea for me to play along. He had already spread the rumor about me, and trying to prove my innocence without evidence was no use. The only way to get back at him is to own the rumor and spread an even bigger one. The next day when I got to school, I began telling people that I truly slept with Chris, but it wasn't fun because he had a micro you-know-what. My friends also helped tell other people, and soon enough, the entire school had heard. Chris started to get laughed at instead of me, and no matter how he tried to say it wasn't true, he couldn't prove it because that would mean he would have to flash the entire school. The rumor stayed alive for 2 whole weeks with girls and guys alike making fun of him. Eventually, he came to me and apologized for starting the rumor about me. He literally went on his knees and begged me to stop the rumors. But I told him he had the power to stop it. All he had to do was confess that he was lying about sleeping with me, and everything would go back to normal. His reputation in school will be tarnished and he'll never be taken seriously again, but at least he won't be made fun of again. He agreed and publicly apologized to me for starting the rumor. Some outraged students reported him to the principal, and he got a 2-week suspension. But that was the end of it. Is this the same principal that at the beginning said OP was trying to tarnish their stellar school and refused to do anything, but this guy gets exposed for lying about sleeping with another student, and all of a sudden he gets suspended from the principal? I'm just wondering what's the line for that principal. This next story is the favored twin versus the rejected twin. What are your thoughts on twins, identical twins? I know most people actually want twins for themselves, and most people are at times envious of the relationship and the kind of closeness that twins possess. But I can tell you for a fact that being a twin is by far the worst thing that has ever happened to me, and not because of any particular reason, but just because I was the younger twin, which to me made the littlest of all sense possible. While I was growing up, myself and my twin, male, 21, were both objects of our father's adoration and profession. He took pride especially in my twin, who was practically his golden child. As unreasonable as it may sound, I was the least favorite child, even though we were both quite literally alike in every single way, except for the fact that we both were just our own different persons and all. I could never figure out the exact reason as to why this was so, as I'd always thought that I was at least entitled to some of the special treatments that my twin was receiving, but it later dawned on me that even though we were twins, my twin brother, let's call him Nathan, was quite the concreted one, and it didn't just end at him hoarding all of our parents' love, care, and affection. He was concreted so much so that he didn't want me to have quite literally anything I wanted. And he always was there at every turn and corner, practically taking everything that belonged to me or that I wanted. And eventually it got so overwhelming that I had to retaliate, and notwithstanding the fact that my parents were readily against the idea of my doing so, I still did it regardless. And there's nothing I regret, absolutely nothing. Straight down to the very beginning of it all, my twin and I were the only children of both my parents, as at some times, my father always made sure that I realized that of the both of us twins, I was the unexpected, or rather, to put it in his words, the unplanned one. Right from the moment where my memory could have served me to the best of its capabilities, I realized that neither one of my parents were really paying me the slightest bit of attention, as at some point, the favoritism between the both of us twins was as clear as day. In most cases of twins, they both were more often than not treated equally, given the same opportunities, were given quite literally the same things and all. Basically speaking, most twins were offered the exact same thing whenever they were going to receive something, but mine wasn't the same, as my parents showed clear favoritism to my twin brother, and almost slightly disregarded me, except in some instances. But this didn't really have such an immediate effect on me, as I was just happy to have been with my family at the time. However, there were some instances where it seemed like things were getting too much, and almost seemed like I couldn't take it anymore. For instance, when we were both in high school, there was an incident where I'd set my sights on a particular girl in my class. We both were taking all the art classes together. As my twin was different, he was the gem of my parents, and thus he was in the sciences, since they were already planning his entire life out for him. Anyway, this girl, let's call her Eva. So Eva and I were offering quite a few courses together back in high school, and I was already starting to develop quite the intense crush on her and all, but I just didn't know how to express myself, and it seemed like she even noticed too. Because there were some instances where she would start encouraging me out of nowhere, telling me how she was readily available to listen to whatever it was that I had to say to her or tell her, and eventually, I was finally able to express my feelings to and for her, and she openly accepted them. She even told me how fond of me she was, and how she quite literally enjoyed spending time with me and all. This was the first time I'd ever felt this happy, albeit the fact that I've been celebrated during my birthdays, which weren't mostly celebration of the both of us twins, but mostly the celebration of my twin alone. Anyways, things were really going well for me at the time, and it seemed like there was nothing that could have stopped what was happening, which was true. Apparently, not until my twin brother got wind of it. Apparently, the idea of myself getting into a relationship didn't really sit well and right with him, as he had at the time made it his sole mission to completely disrupt everything that was going on with Eva and myself. I couldn't have imagined that he would have done what he did, honestly speaking, but for the fact that we both were twins. Eva became so disappointed and annoyed with me, and also with the fact that my twin had the audacity to approach her and woo her in an uncomfortable manner and all. According to her, she felt really used, and like she was being played, and by twins no less. There was quite literally no other way that I could have explained myself where it wouldn't seem like she was played, quite literally by the both of us. And the worst part of the whole issue with Eva was the fact that I honestly and truly liked her, as she was the only person I'd met that truly ever wanted to listen to me and also understood me in the process. But apparently my twin brother couldn't accept the fact that I was already getting happy, even just the slightest bit, and he just came around and quite literally ruined everything for me. He did this for 2 other girls, by the way, all in the span of a few months. But I thought there was nothing I could do at the time, since this has been how things have always felt for me for as long as I remember. Little did I know that the best thing I could have done for myself all these years was to stand up for myself and do what I thought was right, no matter the situation or instance. But I was still too weak-minded at the time, and thus just seemed like quite the impossible task. Anyways, fast forward a little bit to right after high school, as my parents were trying to get admission slots for the both of us into the same college, as that was our dream college and all, but there was just one little problem, and this was the problem of availability of slots. We had applied quite late, when the window of opportunity for application was almost over, and my parents, were not able to secure both slots as planned, as my father had a friend in the admissions office and all, and so he was only able to secure just the one space. This was where I started having issues in and with. So apparently, the idea of me going to college was already seeming like such an unimportant idea, one so minuscule that they didn't even think twice of the idea of letting my brother get the spot and all. There was nothing I could have done, as it seemed like they'd already decided that it was my brother that was going to get the slot. I tried to voice out my concerns as to why he was the only one given the opportunity and not me, seeing as we were both equally deserving of the slot. But my father immediately retaliated, as he made even more emphasis on the fact that I was the insignificant one of the both of them. He also made me fully aware of the fact that my twin brother apparently had more potential to become someone great in the future compared to me. This really hit a sore spot, as I could not even begin to imagine how my parents truly viewed me in all manner of life and reality compared to how they adored my twin brother. I had always wondered why we were even twins in the first place, if we were going to be treated in contrasting ways. Conclusively, that was the height of it all, and just when I'd thought that this was the end of everything that was going to be happening to me as relates to my twin brother, the worst was yet to come. This was just as my twin brother had left for the college of his dreams. I was left with the only other option of going to community college. And don't get me wrong, not like there was anything particularly wrong with community college or anything, but the fact that there was such a huge difference in the way I was being treated and the way my twin brother was being treated, it just didn't make any particular sense as to why this was so. But that was the situation of things, and there was nothing I could have particularly done about it. Or so I had thought. So following his admission into college, my twin brother was not particularly as bright as my parents had thought him to be, as he most definitely had areas where he was struggling greatly, and this was evident when he wasn't able to meet the crossing points for the next session. He was really scared of what he thought our parents would think about him and his poor performance in college, and he was also scared of the fact that our parents might not treat him the same way they used to once they saw his performance, and so he resorted to taking some not so subtle, not so academically legal methods, and he was eventually able to scale through for quite a while. And obviously, things were going really well for him, and I could say the same for myself too, as things weren't what I thought they would be when I was in community college. In fact, I'd gotten so good at my academics that I'd now secured my spot amongst 5 students who had been chosen by the school for a fully paid scholarship program for the best of the students for once they had graduated to any country of their choice for study. It was like everything I'd ever wanted was being handed to me on a platter, just not in the way I wanted it. And I was educationally apt and sound, so scaling through classes, tests, and exams were quite literally a breeze. And so when I came home to break the news to my parents, they were, as expected, still uninterested in my achievements. And I must say, at that point, it really didn't bother me again. Then upon going to my room, I noticed an unopened mail on my twin brother's system, and the details of this mail included some things that could potentially expose my twin brother's true results throughout his stay in college, and it could potentially change the way my parents viewed him, and probably give me the attention I'd been craving for as long as I can remember. I thought long and hard about whether or not I should use this opportunity that had presented itself. And you would think I would decide not to be petty in this instance, but I was petty. I took what I found straight to our parents, and I just left the rest to unfold by itself, dramatically of course, and after quite a few hours of back and forth arguments, he was withdrawn from the college by my parents, and they ultimately came to me for one of the most sincerest apologies I have ever heard from anyone. But it wasn't what I wanted anymore. And so I rejected their apology, and I stormed off in the middle of the night just to clear my head. But one thing is for certain, the feeling I was feeling was one of freedom, achievement, and peace. Yeah, after all that, when their golden child is no longer the golden child they tried to shape them up to be, they come crawling back for option number 2. Good on OP for knowing that this is all just fake. You don't need their approval after all of that, and you let them suffer trying to figure out how to actually support a kid that in their eyes isn't the perfect little angel that they've always tried to shape them into. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. Now, if you want to hear another crazy revenge story, check out that video on the left. Or if you missed my latest video, check out that video on the right. That said, I'll see you all next time with some more stories.